I'm Patrick Watson, I'm an astrologer, and you're watching BigFatAstroVlog. And today, we're talking about why Neptune doesn't rule Pisces. So I made a video a while ago about why Uranus doesn't rule Aquarius and why Saturn does. So if you haven't watched that, you should go ahead and watch that first. People have been asking since I made that video if I would make a video about Neptune and Pisces. So here it is, why Neptune doesn't rule Pisces and why Jupiter does. To be completely fair, I understand why people think that Jupiter and Neptune have some overlap. For example, Jupiter is the professor, the priest, the counselor, while Neptune is the mystic, the spiritualist, the guru. And sometimes those figures can overlap, but fundamentally, Jupiter is about visible goods and wealth, reflective of basic ethical and financial structures that support society, such as banking and conventional morality. At its best, Jupiter signifies opportunity, prosperity, abundance, goodwill, the pursuit of truth. But there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, being overly optimistic, overly generous, thinking you're right all the time, trusting too much in the altruism of others. Those are the problems that Jupiter can present. So contrast this with Neptune, which is all about illusions, imagination, deceptions, dissolution. Neptune gives us altered or transcendent states of consciousness, especially through chemicals or drugs. And this is why Neptune rules film and photography. Movies are projections of whatever we can imagine in our heads, and those can be extremely realistic depictions of reality, but it's not actual reality. Movies aren't actually real. Neptune tends to dissolve boundaries of reality and fantasy in whatever realm it touches. At its best, it dissolves the boundaries between people and nations, giving us an idealistic global consciousness, recognizing our common humanity, our connection with all people, all living things. Dissolving the boundaries between reality and fantasy also allows for mind-blowing art to be created. But at its worst, Neptune isn't a dream, it's a nightmare. The downside of a globally connected consciousness is the loss of individuality and the reign of conformity. Embracing idealism can also mean divorcing rationality, getting swept up in conspiracy theories, cults, and other deceptions and delusions. And while drugs can sometimes lead to enlightening experiences, addiction ruins lives. In Aristotelian terms, both Jupiter and Neptune are so-called wet planets, but Jupiter is hot and Neptune is cold. Neptune is named after the god of the ocean, after all. Pisces is a mutable water sign, so given the equivalencies you can draw between Neptune's wetness, moistness, and the parallels you can draw between its dissolving of boundaries and the concept of mutability, you could almost argue that Neptune should rule Pisces. But no. As I've explained before, the order of rulerships are determined by the planets in their order from the Sun, fanning out from Leo and Cancer, ruled by the two lights, the Sun and the Moon respectively. So, Mercury gets Gemini and Virgo, Venus gets Taurus and Libra, Mars gets Aries and Scorpio, Jupiter gets Pisces and Sagittarius, and Saturn gets Capricorn and Aquarius. The only way that Neptune and Pisces could make sense is if it follows Uranus and Aquarius, except I already proved that it doesn't. And even if that was the logic we were using, then Pluto should rule Aries rather than Scorpio, so no. But none of that's convincing to anyone who thinks that Neptune should rule Pisces. Some might say the proof is in the pudding. So here's some pudding. Now I realize this isn't like the perfect way to present this, and people can argue about this being cherry picking, but the reality is I can't do more than a few examples to keep this video within a reasonable time frame, and you're more than free to contradict my findings. So anyway, one way we can compare Jupiter and Neptune as rulers of Pisces is by looking at people who have the Ascendant in Pisces. The ruler of the Ascendant is supposed to give you an idea about someone's basic identity and the way they get through life. So if someone has Pisces rising, then theoretically the condition of Jupiter or Neptune should provide the better description. So my first example is Pope Benedict. He was born with Pisces rising, with Jupiter and Pisces in the first house, and Neptune and Leo in the sixth house. Now, you tell me, is a Pope described more by Jupiter and Pisces in the first, or Neptune and Leo in the sixth? An upholder of so-called conventional, standard, or traditional morality. A priest, a scholar, professor. Yeah, kinda. That's not to say that it doesn't mean anything that he has Neptune in the sixth, but if Neptune rules Pisces and Pisces is rising, then Neptune should be describing something basic and essential about his identity, but does it? I just don't think so. He's a fucking pope. That's Jupiter, not Neptune. My next example is Phil Mcgraw, also known as Dr. Phil, the television psychologist. He was born with Pisces rising, with Jupiter in the first house in Pisces, and Neptune in Libra in the 8th. So, between Jupiter and Neptune, what is he more like? He's a psychologist, he's a counselor, an advice dispenser who's made his own little business empire of self-help schlocky bullshit. And sure, he's terrible, but I mean, is he more of a Jupiter figure or more of a Neptune figure? I think it's clear, Jupiter, obviously. But you know what? Those were both Jupiter and Pisces examples, so maybe that's unfair. What about Alexander Graham Bell? He was born with Pisces rising, with Jupiter and Gemini in the 4th house, and Neptune and Aquarius in the 12th. So this is the guy who invented the telephone. And he invented the telephone because he was researching hearing devices because his mother was deaf and his wife was deaf. This is also why his father, grandfather, and brother all studied speech and hearing as well. It was a family affair. So, is Alexander Graham Bell better represented by Jupiter in Gemini, a sign that concerns principles of communication being ruled by Mercury, in the 4th house, a house that concerns one's family? Or is it represented by Neptune at Aquarius, a sign that concerns cold rationality being ruled by Saturn in the 12th house, a house that concerns catastrophe, self-undoing, and enemies? I mean, come on, that's pretty clear. Jupiter is doing a better job here in speaking for this sign in this chart. So again, we are looking at the condition of the Ascendant ruler in order to determine which planet better represents the kind of basic identity of the person you're looking at. Richard Pryor was born with Pisces rising, with Jupiter in Taurus in the 3rd house, and Neptune in Virgo in the 7th house. So Richard Pryor is a comedian, which just by itself evokes Jupiter in the 3rd rather than Neptune in the 7th, but let's explore further. His Neptune isn't really aspected by anything, it's just sitting there on the descendant. His Jupiter, however, has a lot going on. It's conjunct Saturn and opposed by Venus and Mars. So both malefics are conjoined, each benefic, and both benefics and malefics are opposed to each other. This paints a picture of someone who never has a lot of good without also having a lot of bad. The malefics aspecting his Jupiter also suggests his biting, aggressive, fearless nature of his comedy. So here's a brief rundown of his life, and you can decide which one is better represented by his Neptune on the descendant or this kind of embattled Jupiter. He was abandoned by his mom as a child. He was looked after by his cruel grandmother who raised him in a brothel. He was molested by a priest as a child, expelled from school as a teen, served time in jail while he was in the army for being involved in a stabbing. I mean, okay, wow. Of course someone with a background like this becomes a legendary comedian. So, even alongside all his success in comedy, he struggles with addictions to drugs, alcohol, sex, and he lit himself on fire after freebasing cocaine, suffering 2nd and 3rd degree burns over half his body. So far, does this sound like Neptune and Virgo in the 7th? Or Jupiter and Taurus in the 3rd getting besieged by Mars and Saturn? I think it's pretty clear that the troubled condition of Jupiter describes his essential identity and vitality rather than Neptune on the descendant. And that's not to say that Neptune doesn't mean anything in his chart. He had 5 marriages. But does Neptune have the central role the ruler of the Ascendant does? Does it really describe who Richard Pryor is? I don't think so. So there's some of the reasons why I think Jupiter rules Pisces, not Neptune. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Big Fat Astro Vlog. If you liked it, please give it a like, please give it a comment, let me know what you think, so you can shout at me about how I'm terrible for thinking that Neptune doesn't rule Pisces. I'll get a good laugh out of it, and you should also subscribe so you can see when my next video comes out. And I also want to say big thank you to all the people who support me on Patreon. I could not do this without you guys, and I cannot put these episodes out without your support in the time it takes to make these videos. So thank you so much to everyone who's given, and if you would like to keep seeing videos like this, then please give to my Patreon, even $1. It allows you to see the videos a day early. So I would recommend it. If I were you, I would give money to me. I hate asking for money, but that's the world we live in. So thank you all to those who have given, and please consider giving to my Patreon if you're awesome. Thanks.
Moist. Neptune's moistness. Moist. Moist. Moist.